This is Tony Robles, and this is the Audio Garden. Welcome to Listen and Be Heard Radio for readers and writers. And I'm really excited about our guest today. She is an author that is embarked on a brand new book of essays. And, you know, I do love the essay form. Our author today is Monica Macansantos. Now, she was born and raised in the Philippines and was a James A. Michener Fellow for Writing at the University of Texas at Austin, where she earned her MFA in fiction and poetry in 2013. And she is the author of the essay collection, which we are going to speak on today. It's titled Returning to My Father's Kitchen, forthcoming from Northwestern University Press slash Curbstone Books, uh, due to come out any day now. Um,
Well, copies
also,
are already out.
oh, okay, no
Yeah,
kidding.
but
Okay,
like it's out but not out.
fantastic. And she her work has been published in various collections and books, and she's been four times recognized as notable in the best American essays in 2016, 2021, 2022, and 2023, and is a regular book reviewer for the Colorado Review website. Monica Macansantos, welcome to Listen and Be Heard Radio for readers and writers.
Well, thank you for having me, Tony.
Thank you for coming, and congratulations first of all on your book, Returning to My Father's Kitchen. You know, one of the things that you wrote, and you wrote so much on so many different levels on the book. You wrote that writing is liberating precisely because it is an act of will. And I was wondering what writing has done to liberate you, and specifically what has it liberated you from?
Well, for one, it has liberated me from silencing because we come from a culture, and I don't want to like make broad brushstrokes on the culture because there are Filipinos who are like very brave to speak up against injustice. But it's also a culture where there's a lot of oppression and a lot of silencing. There's like an unspoken hierarchy, even in the literary community. And there are gatekeepers who decide who gets to speak up and who doesn't, and whose values are upheld. So I felt early on that I could speak up against, well, not just injustice, but also this act of silencing and why we choose to, well, allow some people to speak and not other people to speak. So,
Hmm. You know, what I found really fascinating is the relationship of your father to your writing and your just your mission as an artist. Now, you were born in the Philippines, but I guess you spent a lot of your early years in the US, and then your family decided to move back to the Philippines, um, which would make, I was thinking about this, which would make your father an expat rather
yes.
than an expat. He was an ex-expat.
Mhm.
And, that's a whole thing of, adjusting and readjusting,
Yeah.
taking off, returning,
Mhm.
departing. Tell us about what that was like. You were very young when you went back, right?
Yeah, so I was 8.5, about to turn 9 when we returned to the Philippines. It was very strange because growing up, my parents made the Philippines out to be this place where we could belong, where we could be our true selves. And I think that my parents felt this in a way that I didn't quite pick up on as a kid. I didn't quite pick up on their, well, alienation or their isolation.
Mm,
And although my parents liked living in the US for obvious reasons, I still that they I still feel that they felt that it wasn't quite home, which is why we returned. And so when we got back, the Philippines didn't quite mesh with my idea of what the Philippines was. I as a child, like I didn't feel that I quite belonged because, well, for instance, like in school, other children ostracized me, and like a friend I also made who was half Filipina, half European, because like we didn't belong. And you know how children are, like they are very like strict when it comes to reinforcing these rules of who belongs and who doesn't belong. Like they what their parents don't say out loud, they do.
Mm.
Yeah, and then sometimes Filip like Filipino adults would talk to me in Tagalog, assuming that I could like speak Tagalog, and then I'd just like stare at them like baffled, and then they'd be like, "Yeah, I know, yeah," like they weren't understanding in the way that I thought they'd be understanding.
Mm.
So eventually, well, it was basically like I was basically like a baby thrown into a swimming pool, and then it was like sink or swim. So
Right, right,
I like they don't have the same um I guess like facilities in place to help people going to the Philippines, especially children, adjust to Filipino life. So I had to, I mean, learn Tagalog without like a Tagalog version of ESL.
right, right. Well, you returned, and when you got there, it was a couple of days prior to a big typhoon.
Yes.
And I'm thinking of all the metaphors in this book because, when your parents left, that was during the Marcos dictatorship, which was a typhoon in itself, and you're coming
All
back
right. Well,
into another.
although they left maybe 4 years after the end of
Mm,
martial law. Yeah, after
okay.
Marcos left. Yeah. But they were like the Philippines was still very much recovering, and yeah,
Yeah, because one of the things that you wrote was that you'd returned to the Philippines, and uh, I guess by that time Filipinos had long gotten rid of the dictator, but not its ghost.
yes,
And I wanted you to talk maybe a little bit more about that because I think part of us, in our memory, we don't forget these things, and there are traumas that are involved with
yeah,
that. And maybe speak on how that's shaped your writing, your role as a writer.
yeah. So I feel that, and this may sound presumptuous of me, but I feel that writers are obligated to fight for democracy in the societies to which they belong. So, um, well, the Philippines is a very young country. When did we like gain independence? 1945. So
Mm,
we were a colony under Spain and under the US, and then shortly under Japan for a very long time. So we were just learning the ropes of democracy when Marcos came in and like well took away democracy from us. So when they like the Marcoses left, like I don't think that we were able to fully recover. And how do I put it? Like the norms that the Marcoses established, like which were like I mean they were like they violated the norms of like what decent society should be like
mm,
like they normalized corruption.
yeah, yeah.
They normalized like oppression.
So they normalized dysfunction. Dysfunction became the norm,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, and like
yeah.
killing judges that like disagree with you, killing journalists, that became the norm.
Mm,
So long after the Marcoses left, these were behaviors that like still I mean were still in place. Like
mm,
judges still got killed, journalists still got killed if they got on the wrong side of a local politician who was like I don't know decimating a rainforest. So I feel that unfortunately these systems of oppression um, also were in place within the literary community, and
mm,
that there were members of the literary community that upheld this system of elitism and of like a lot of them like and this is something that turns me off like a lot of them will still take on the job of writing the autobiographies of politicians to like make their life a little bit more savory for the reading public. So
Mm,
yeah, and then they'll allow themselves to be wined and dined by powerful politicians. So it it just goes against what we're supposed to stand for.
yeah, there was a book that came out a couple of years ago by Patricia Evangelista
Mhm.
called "Some People Need Killing,"
Yes.
about the Duterte regime or government, and she talks about how it impacted the literary establishment, the literary community, and sometimes there was a wedge or a rift between folks. I want to talk about the title of your book. I love the title. I had kind of an affinity because, my father has so much influence on my work. Wrote so much about him. I could probably write his whole life story. But the title of the book, "Returning to My Father's Kitchen," and this whole thing about returning, departure, returning. Um, you wrote that eating becomes a spiritual act. Can you
Yeah.
tell us the role of food because it was so important in that particular chapter about your
Yeah.
connection with him? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that observation, Tony. So, my father was a poet, but he was also a cook.
Mm,
And I feel that his artistry as a writer also translated into his artistry in the kitchen.
yeah.
And I feel that there's a lot about literature and writing that takes away like the heart. Like there's not it's like sometimes there's like not enough art heart in our art and in our writing. But for my father, like he wrote with like all his heart, and he also cooked for us with all his heart. So when he died, it was it was like difficult for me to adjust to that new reality.
Mm,
And a lot of his presence in my life came in the form of the physical and the felt, and that manifested itself in the form of cooking. So, what I did when I eventually returned to the Philippines was try to recreate his dishes.
yeah.
And that's how like he became alive again in our kitchens and in our bellies.
Mm,
So, I mean, I'm just interested in how much like love and affection is manifested through physical actions or like
mm.
just basically physical things like food.
I could taste it as I was reading it. You were talking about the calamansi, the different types of soy sauce he was using. Then he was always um, really cognizant of health because I think he had gout and I think your mother had
Yeah.
high blood pressure, and he
Yes.
would take the skin off the
Hmm.
chicken because it had all the cholesterol, and I guess he was also aware that in certain other parts, like in the US, there were certain things that you wasn't readily available.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm like, well, living in Las Vegas now and like interacting with the huge Filipino community here, I can see how people like maintain their connections with their homeland through cooking and like and food is like such an important part of Filipino culture because it's how we gather
Mm.
and like we gather around food sometimes more than anything else.
Yeah, I got a sense of, the I guess the spiritual presence.
Mhm.
And then it's also so tactile too because, it's the smell and how a smell or a sound can bring you to a certain place and bring a certain memory to you. Um,
Yeah, it's like the Proustian
mhm.
Madeleines or Madelines.
Oh,
Yeah,
right, right, yeah.
yeah, I was reading Remembrance of Things Past before, like shortly before this interview,
Hmm.
and it's just so interesting how the past very much belongs to the present, and how like something very tactile or like something like a taste or a smell can reawaken all of these memories.
Yeah, yeah, I can no, I can relate to that. And as a writer, you're kind of a little bit of everything. You kind of do work in all different genres. Um, Tell us why you decided to do essays. Like I had said before, I really like essays a lot because I think
Mhm.
you can kind of mess with barriers and genre. Why did you decide to do a collection of essays, and what inspired you to make the title what it is?
Yeah, so I came to the essay form from a background in fiction. I struggled with it during my first attempts because I wasn't quite sure how to give narrative shape to
Mm,
my own life. Like I knew how to give narrative shape to the lives of other people, but my own life, like do I just like put it all out there? But so one of the first essays in the collection is Becoming a Writer, like the essay we just talked about.
mhm,
And I worked on that with the team at the now defunct Dio Literary Magazine, and they helped me give shape to my memories. So that was like a very instructional experience for me. And later on, most of the essays in this collection were written down after my father very suddenly passed away.
mm.
And I was working on fiction at the time of his death, but I felt so tender at the time, and I felt that like I didn't really exactly have the energy to turn outwards and tell the stories of other people, which is what I do when I write fiction. Like I
Mm.
had to turn inwards, and nonfiction gave me that outlet to, well, just like be an oyster, I guess, or
Yeah,
like what do they call it? Like some
a
like
chameleon, a chameleon
yeah,
or chameleon, yeah, or something
yeah,
like.
or like some like shelled creature where I could just like nestle in my shell and like develop these pearls
Oh, like an
within.
oyster, right? An
Like an
oyster, an
oyster. Like I
oyster.
mean, just like I mean, I had to take care of myself and turn inwards, and like there were all these emotions that were roiling within me, and nonfiction gave me an avenue for, well, articulating those emotions and turning them into something that was meaningful, not just to myself, but other people.
Mm, mm. No, that makes total sense. Essays, it's funny because you can kind of play with it. There's the lyrical essay, there's the personal essay, which I really appreciate. Um, there were a lot of passages in these essays that were very instructive. There was one that was actually kind of took me back to my own program in Vermont, where we talked about something called high exposition. And
Mhm.
there was actually a paragraph here that you wrote that is a perfect example. It would be high exposition 101. And
Mhm.
I'm going to read I'm going to
Right.
read this because I know you spent a lot of time in planes. You had lived in Texas for a while, and you were in New Zealand,
Mhm.
uh, back to the Philippines. And well, it reads like this: what is it about being up in the air that makes our losses feel more acute? Does our closeness to the heavens remind us of our own mortality as we stare out the plane's windows at the nothingness that surrounds us? Good
Thank
example of high exposition that asks the question. And one of the things I learned in MFA was that with the personal essay, you're not dealing with the constraints of time,
Mhm.
and that you are more or less dealing with a topic or a subject.
Yeah.
And more often than not, you're left with more questions than answers. Um, Tell us about the process of writing these essays, because you touch on a lot of different subjects. What are some of, I guess, the maybe the unifying themes?
Yeah, thank you for that. So, well, what I love about the essay form, as you mentioned, is that it gives you a lot of freedom,
Yeah.
movement. And well, I came to fiction from a background of in poetry. So, I think that like although I haven't been writing poetry for years, like my nonfiction has given me an outlet for like these lyrical impulses.
Mm,
And that's why it's the first time for me to hear that term high exposition. I never took a nonfiction workshop. Like I'm very
mm,
embarrassed to
yeah.
admit that. But like so I wrote these essays. I wouldn't say that like I was in like a mental fog or anything, or maybe I was a little bit, but I felt that I was so unmoored that like I was wandering around thinking about my life, thinking about my father's life and how he influenced me. So I guess I was like a little, it was like I was steering a little boat to different places.
Mm,
And so like a topic would like leap up to me like food, or another topic about my father's love for William Butler Yeats, or
okay.
another like something about like I my mom and I would go on a walk during lockdown, and I'd see like the houses of my childhood disappearing, so I'd think of something, and then slowly this collection of essays came to be. And I guess my obsessions about memory and how memory grounds us in the sense of like to the sense of home and belonging, and how we lose that when, I mean, we experience devastating loss, like could be the loss of a parent or the loss of a friend. So I think that these are themes that, well, like writers gravitate towards like the themes they obsess over the most, right? So
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
all in the mind, you know? Yeah.
yes.
Ruminating and yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and like I forgot to answer your question about how this like the title of the collection came to be, but I guess that like the term like, well, first of all, fathers in Philippine literature and Philippine movies are like, there's a tendency to depict them in a very one-dimensional way, as like somebody who's like strict and the padre de familia, and this didn't quite mesh with the fathers I knew and the father I had. And at the same time, like we don't really see fathers as characters who belong to the kitchen.
Mm,
But my father
yeah.
did. And the kitchen wasn't just a place where he like cooked. It's also a place where he gathered. It's also a place where he wrote his poetry
Hmm.
at the kitchen table. So, and kitchens can like represent many things for everybody, but also for like a lot of Filipinos. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, because there was an essay in there, my father and W.B. Yeats, and then all of a sudden I'm thinking of the voice of Yeats. They have these rare recordings where he says, "I want to go back to the Lake Isle of Innisfree." It's like, you know, you had said in the book that, quote unquote, my father was a product of this magic, and so am I. He understood how our lives belong to a mysterious alchemy of forces whose workings lie beyond human comprehension. Um, so, the magical, the fantastical, those things that he was open to. Yet, there were things that you didn't know about him until I guess he opened up that briefcase and showed you that, yeah, he was a literary person, that he was a writer, and he had won the Palanca Award. Can you tell us about your discoveries of that and how that may have changed you or shaped you?
Yeah, so what's interesting about our life in America is that, and I think that a lot of Filipino immigrants and well, immigrants in general can connect with this, how you have to like leave your life back home once you moved to this new place. And there can be something liberating in the act of cutting yourself off from that old life and starting fresh. But for a lot of immigrants, like the roles we have to take on in our new countries to survive are not liberating at all. Like we have to take on service jobs.
Mm,
Like a lot of people who didn't want to become nurses, they wanted to be someone like, I mean, to do other things, like have to become nurses because that's what America wants you to do because like they need nurses. So in the case of my father, like he had a hard time, well, establishing himself as a writer in the US. And I think that, well, it was just much harder, much harder
mm,
for Filipino writers to break into the US literary scene in the early 90s. It was still a very white landscape.
Mm.
So he was dealing with that and getting rejection after rejection, while back home he was winning Palanca awards. So I didn't really know who he was in the Philippines. Like I only saw him cooking, bringing me to the library, and it was, I may have said something, I don't really remember anymore, but like I think I mentioned what it was in the book, but he took me to their bedroom and opened up this briefcase and showed me his rolled up certificates, which were his Palanca awards, and that just made me interested in the life that we had left behind and why we had left that life behind. Yeah. And
So I
like,
guess it was a departure from where you were at, departing to go to a departure into memory and to, you know, figure things out, I guess, trying to figure out
yeah.
why. Yeah.
Yeah, it like just made me realize that I have this home that we may have to leave behind sometimes. In my case, it was because my mom was doing her PhD at the University of Delaware. So we go to other places for better opportunities, but it's not, that doesn't mean that we're cutting ourselves off,
Mm.
that, or that like cutting ourselves off would be good for me. Like, I mean, if I didn't know that about my father, like I don't know if I would have become a writer.
Yeah, I guess, you know, it's one of those moments, one of those um moments where, you know, you especially if you're, you know, open to it and sensitive enough to see the importance of it, especially, you know, being at a young age, you know,
Yeah.
those are the turning points. You know, there was an interesting poet who I think it passed not too long ago. His name was Sam Tagatak or Tagatak, who wrote poetry, and you know, it was experimental poetry. His poetry were like short films. They were like choppy, and
Mhm.
what it signified was the chop. It was like the severance between home
Yeah.
and coming here. So it was very choppy the way he wrote
Yeah.
the poems. It was disorienting, but that was the whole point. And then I guess in discovering that about your father, it was a way of putting that
Hmm.
choppiness together and making sense of it.
Yeah, and well, I guess this is also a theme that I return to in the final essay of my book, Disappearing Houses, because we have this tendency, and it's not just in American society, but also in Filipino society. Maybe we're like imitating our American colonizers, but we tend to cut off our connections with the past,
Mm,
think that
yeah.
this will like give us, I don't know, like a better future. When
Hmm.
the past also allows us to navigate the future.
Mm,
So,
yeah.
like, I think that my connection with my motherland, um, because of like my father instilling in me a love for the Philippines and the love for the life that we had left behind, also gave me a roadmap for how I like navigate the writing life. I think that if he didn't show that part of him, I I may have become a writer. I would have just been much more lost and unmoored.
Well, you know, you had then, I guess, had won a contest or had some poetry when you were younger that was published in one of the newspapers, which I know that, you know, in the book you said that he was very proud. He would
Mhm.
show his friends, and I guess it was kind of embarrassing for you to get that attention, but you know, it was, you know, it was cool. You know, memory, it's funny, like it's a double-edged sword in your book because on the one hand, um, as a girl in school having to adjust coming from the US, everything was, you know, how I guess the way you put it was by rote. It was, you know, you were
Mhm.
rewarded for remembering for the
Yeah.
sake of remembering and not necessarily for the sake of understanding. But on the other hand, memory is paramount to the life of a writer. If you could maybe advise some younger writers or fellow writers on, you know, just how to maybe navigate memory and how they can use it to, you know, enhance, you know, their own writing.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So, memory is such a slippery thing. But at the same time, we have to ask ourselves, why do I
Hmm.
remember this event in my life over other events in my life? Is my mind or my subconscious telling me something? So I think that our subconscious and maybe our memories are wiser than us. So we have to listen to that wisdom.
Mm,
Why am I thinking about my Lola and that moment she broke into dance in her kitchen? Why
yeah.
am I remembering my Lolo making a walis ting ting in their like front yard? Why do these memories stick out to me? I think as writers we have to listen to those memories and well, I guess like figure out what is this memory telling me and what is it about me that holds on to this memory over everything else.
Yeah, I guess, each essay is a
Hmm.
memory unto itself. It reflects your own experience. You were I guess had lived in New Zealand in Wellington. You were involved in a car accident, is that correct?
Yes.
And it kind of it reminded me a little bit of what Grace Toulousan wrote in her book, The Body
Hmm.
Papers, when she was on a Fulbright in Manila, having to navigate
Oh,
the traffic in Manila, and damn near getting into a car accident. Hey, didn't you see me? And I think the title of your essay in there had something to do with being seen and unseen.
yes.
Um, so yeah, tell us about that because that's a big issue. That I think a lot of people become writers because nobody's listening to us, nobody sees us, we feel invisible.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Well, throughout my childhood in the Philippines, I felt that I was being unseen, or else like there were things about me, maybe something I said that was threatening, that like had to be tamped down by my teachers
Mhm.
or my classmates. And then being an international student in New Zealand, like well, although I was not paying tuition, I received a scholarship to do my PhD. International students in New Zealand are oftentimes seen as cash cows and
Hmm.
nothing more. I guess same here in the States. But yeah, like, so that was just such an eye-opening moment for me, how people would just insist on erasing me and how like they'd insist on reshaping my memory so that I'd remember how it went down, how that accident went down. So, like, the car initially stopped when I held up my hands before like ramming into me. Like, they just kept like, when I told the police that detail in the story, they just kept erasing that. Like, so it's like, why do you want, like, why are you insisting on erasing that? So, like, it's also something about memory that I think is important. Like, we also have to think, why do people insist on erasing certain memories that are uncomfortable? And why do we have to fight to tell the entire story? So that's like
And
something that I learned like during that experience and afterwards while writing that essay.
yeah, I mean, I've been in a car accident myself where I was knocked out cold, had a
Hmm.
broken leg. It wasn't quite the same thing. I wasn't, but I can relate to what you're saying because when you were trying to recount what had happened, it was almost as if there was a template that
Hmm.
or a narrative that already existed, and that anything you said was not quite true,
Yeah.
or there was some kind of doubt, as
Hmm.
if your mental faculties uh, didn't meet didn't meet the standard by which one would be taken seriously. If that
Yeah,
makes it, if
yeah,
that makes any
well,
sense,
because like my story didn't fit their template and
Exactly,
it
yeah.
was like so inconvenient to them because like what I realized during the course of like me fighting with them was that like to acknowledge my side of the story, they'd have to acknowledge my humanity.
Hmm.
That would have been very inconvenient for them. Why? Yeah, you'll find out when you read my book.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, there were so many things, so many essays that touched on so many things that we could probably spend another 2 weeks just kind of kind of scratching the surface. But let's see. Another line here that really popped out said that the struggle for freedom shape shifts when the enemy changes.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Because that can apply in any setting. And, maybe if you could talk a little bit more about that, because, that's important. It, you have to, I guess, have to know your setting, know where you're at, know
Yeah.
what it deals with knowing what you're up against, what you're dealing with.
Yeah, so when I went to the US for my MFA, it was, well, very much so a liberating experience after everything I had experienced within the Filipino literary community. But I also felt that like some of my stories weren't quite like understood with the same amount of sensitivity, or there were things that like just like I mean we're lost in translation
Hmm.
because of these like deeper power structures of whiteness. And I began to realize, and I'm not sure if I state this quite clearly in the book, but what I faced in the Philippines, like the oppression, like was also deeply rooted in colonialism and like the enduring legacy of colonialism and white supremacy. Like you have this, well, foreign colonizer, and they leave, and then we're so like not used to having like an oppressor that we have to like replace them with our native oppressors.
Mm,
So, and you think that like once you leave that behind, then you leave every like that entire system behind, when this is like part and parcel of like this bigger systemic problem throughout the world of colonialism and its ghost, and
yes,
how
yes.
stories of, well, the formerly colonized continue to be erased by like unconscious biases, like people who are otherwise well-meaning but they just don't quite see it.
And then you're in a situation where you might be in a group or a place, and people looking at you like, well, what are you doing here?
Yes.
As if you don't know, as if you don't know what I'm doing here. Like Jose Antonio Vargas said, well, we're here because you were there, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think a lot of what you said is not to, downplay what you've written, but what Vida Cruz Borja wrote in her essay. What you said really addresses that. It's the essay. It's called "On the Inactive Protagonists," and it's only like maybe 2 pages, 3 pages at the very most, but it really addresses that, colonialism, the ghost of that, and how it plays out in the MFA workshops and so on.
Yeah, it's something that we have to consciously address. And I think it's like, well, I know that like people in like there are a lot of good people teaching at MFA programs who are trying their best. And like I mean, from our side as like the people who don't quite belong, we push for change.
Yeah.
And we all, I think it's also good to recognize when changes are made. Yeah.
Yes. 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 Again, this is Listen and Be Heard radio for readers and writers. This is the Audio Garden. In my case, it's the Audio Garden Kitchen. where we're doing this interview. Monica Macansantos is joining us from Las Vegas. She is the author of a brand new essay collection, which I'm very excited about. And I think everybody should go out and get this because there's lots of good writing in this and really poignant and powerful writing. It's called Returning to My Father's Kitchen, and it's going to be out within the next couple of days. It is forthcoming from Northwestern University Press / Curbstone Books. And there's also a story collection called Love and Other Rituals. Is that
Yes.
forthcoming as well?
That came out back in 2022, but it's still available. It's still in print.
Oh, fantastic. Is who's the publisher for that?
Um, it's called Grattan Street Press. It's a university teaching press in Australia. But they
Okay.
have distribution here, so you can also get it in the States.
How is it working with the university presses as maybe opposed to like the other traditional presses? Or do you find that there's more freedom or, what was your experience like?
Well, I've never worked with a big five, so I can't speak about that experience. But I've noticed that university presses, because they get more support and because they're not profit driven,
Mm,
they will take more risks with essay collections. Like when I was pitching this to agents, they loved the writing, but they're like, I'm not quite sure how to sell this. But
mm,
Marissa Siegel at Northwestern had no problems with it. She was like,
mm.
I love essay collections and we don't care if it makes money or not.
Right, right,
And
right.
yeah, so that's like what I love about university presses. And they're also committed to enriching the intellectual landscape of
Mm.
our literature. So I think that they will take on more like intellectually challenging work.
So intellectually driven as opposed to just solely money driven, I
Yes.
guess, right?
Yes. And like,
Again, yeah,
yeah, they
yeah. No, that's fantastic. I'm glad you had a good experience with that. Again, Monica Macansantos, the author of the new essay collection, Returning to My Father's Kitchen. For people that want to get your book or learn more about you, if there's ways to access you online or ways to learn more about what you're doing.
Yeah, so, well, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I also have a website. So if you want to reach out to me, there's a contact form on my website. And I will also be like touring this book. So,
Hmm.
like in case you live in Las Vegas, Austin, Houston, or San Francisco, then you can come like see me at any of my book events. I'll also be doing a virtual book event with Belcanto Books, which is a wonderful Filipino-owned book
Fantastic. Yeah.
in Long Beach.
Mm.
So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, again, Monica, thank you so much for being with us on Listen and Be Heard Radio for readers and writers. A wonderful collection. Wish you all the success on this. It's well deserved. Again, my name is Tony Robles. This is the Audio Garden. Listen and Be Heard Radio for readers and writers. Thank you for listening, and we're going to toss it back to the studio and Martha.